In July of 2008, Cindy Anthony reported her 2-year-old granddaughter Kaylee missing, claiming she hadn't seen her in more than a month. The toddler's mother, Casey, had told various lies about Kaylee's whereabouts, before eventually admitting that she hadn't seen her daughter for weeks, during which time she'd been out partying. 5 months later, Kaylee's remains were found near the Anthony home with duct tape around the skull, and Casey was charged with first-degree murder. During her trial, prosecutors alleged that Casey wished to free herself from parental responsibilities and killed her daughter by drugging her and duct taping her nose and mouth. The defense otherwise argued that Casey simply suffered from pathological lying and that Kaylee's death was accidental. To the disbelief of millions across the country, Casey was soon acquitted of the murder charge, but found guilty on providing false information to law enforcement. She was released after serving just 3 years in prison and remains free to this day. It's worth noting that years after her trial, it was revealed that the day before her daughter died, Casey Anthony had searched foolproof suffocation methods on Mozilla Firefox. But police overlooked this crucial evidence because they only checked her search history from Internet Explorer. In the past year, Casey has reportedly been having an affair with a father of 2, ruining his marriage of 20-plus years. Upon being confronted about the home wrecking, Casey reportedly responded, "I'm living the life I want." They thought she was the perfect mother, but the truth was far worse than anyone could have ever imagined. Utah mother of 6, Ruby Franke, became known on social media for her perfect family and parenting skills. She would give wholesome parenting advice on her YouTube channel 8 Passengers, which eventually amassed over 2.5 million subscribers. But viewers began to raise an eyebrow in 2020, when Franke's 16-year-old boy said that he'd been banned from his bedroom and was forced to sleep on a beanbag for 7 months. On another occasion, Ruby sent her 6-year-old daughter to school without a packed lunch because she believed she was old enough to prepare her own meals. When the school contacted her with concern over this, Ruby still refused to bring a lunch for her daughter.
So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. And hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a...
Ruby's idea of not letting her children eat as a disciplinary action became a disturbing pattern throughout her videos.
Only you say it one more time, and then you're gonna lose the privilege to eat.
I don't think you're gonna be able to eat. But if you're not responsible for your lunch and your lunch money, that's the natural consequence. And I'm really sorry you're learning this the hard way.
An online petition was soon launched reporting perceived child abuse and neglect. But Ruby and her husband spoke out in defense of their parenting, saying the incidents had been taken out of context. However, by 2022, the couple had separated and Ruby's YouTube channel was banned, prompting her to begin working as a mental health coach for a company run by licensed therapist Jody Hildebrandt. The two formed a relationship and moved in together, before launching a new YouTube channel called Connections, where they again gave advice on parenting. But the dark truth behind them began to unravel in 2023, when one of Ruby's sons escaped through a window and ran to his neighbor's house requesting food and water. Appearing emaciated with open wounds and duct tape around his limbs, the boy's condition prompted his neighbors to break down into tears and call police, who later found 3 of Franke's other children in similar conditions.
Jody? Hey, you step out.
I have my turn.
That's great. Step out of the house.
No, I'm not gonna step out of
Step
the
out of the
house.
house. Step out of the house.
Whoa.
This is gonna start. There we go. There we go.
Wait a minute, how do you come in my house?
Right there.
They can run into my house.
You okay? Is this just you in here? Where's your sister at?
The kids were brought to the hospital and treated for severe malnourishment and deep lacerations from being tied up with rope. Police later reported that according to the boy, cayenne pepper and honey had been used to dress his wounds. While searching the home, police found Ruby's journal, which documented the awful abuse of her children. She apparently believed that her 2 youngest kids were demonically possessed and should therefore be punished. One of her entries read, "Sleep outside, shaved her head, doused him with water, over his nose and mouth. Head in the toilet, needs to be painful, blood on his face, scream and scream." Another entry read, "I told the boy he emulates a snake. If he wants to emulate the Savior, he needs to be 100% obedient with exactness. The body must engage in good work, and the good works need to be painful. I have the power of God, and he must obey." Both Franke and Hildebrandt ended up pleading guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse, and received the same sentences of 4 to 30 years in prison, the exact durations of which are still pending. In 2013, well-respected meteorologist Tim Samaras became the first storm chaser killed by a tornado along with his son Paul and friend Carl. The Oklahoma tornado expanded from 1 mile to 2.6 miles in about 30 seconds and was the largest ever recorded. It suddenly took a sharp turn towards the group, leaving them screaming their last words over the radio, "We're gonna die." These were the final photos of extreme cave diver Dave Shaw just moments before his final dive into South Africa's Bushman's Hole. He blacked out at 872 feet while retrieving a fellow diver's body, and his helmet cam recorded his demise. Osama bin Laden's son Omar was severely beaten by his father for smiling too widely when he was a young boy. He trained in Al-Qaeda camps starting at 14 years old, but left the terrorist organization in 2000 since he didn't support the idea of killing innocent civilians. In 2006, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years to the point where her skin had completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail in her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. In 1899, brothers George and Willie Muse were kidnapped from their farm in Virginia by a freak hunter when they were just little boys. Born with albinism, they were forced to perform in circuses for the next 25 years under the names the Sheep-Headed Cannibals and Ambassadors from Mars. They were often ordered to partake in disturbing acts such as biting the heads off of snakes or consuming raw meat in front of crowds. The brothers essentially worked as modern-day slaves until their mother found them working for the Ringling Brothers and successfully sued for their release. In 2002, German actor Gunther Kaufmann confessed to falling on his accountant during a fight and accidentally suffocating the man to death with his 260-pound body. The actor was subsequently sentenced to 15 years in prison as a result of the incident. But 3 years later, it was revealed that Kaufman was innocent and had only confessed to protect his dying wife, who had actually murdered the accountant. After a night of drinking in 2010, Michigan man Jeffrey Duthette was sleeping in his bed when his dog Kiko suddenly bit off his toe. When he went to the hospital, it turned out the toe had a bad infection that likely would have spread and killed Jerry if left untreated. Thus, the dog had saved his owner's life. Ariana Grande reportedly has a longtime stalker named Paige Neiman who tries to impersonate the famous singer. She's been obsessed with Grande since she was 12 years old, and has allegedly undergone several plastic surgeries to look like her despite being only 20 years old. When the Titanic sank, the richest passenger on board was business mogul John Jacob Astor IV, who had enough money in his bank account to build 30 Titanics. He ended up giving up his spot in the final lifeboat to instead save the lives of a random woman and her daughter. These were the last photos of Garrett Miller, taken just minutes before a soccer goalpost tipped over and struck him in the head, killing him instantly. In 2013, a family dog named Killian was protecting a baby boy from an abusive babysitter by standing between them and growling at her. This made the boy's parents suspicious of the babysitter, so they hid a recording device under the couch and heard her swearing at the baby while possibly shaking and slapping him. The sitter eventually pleaded guilty to assault and battery of a child and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. As a teenager, the late rapper Big Pun was an accomplished boxer and basketball player. But after dropping out of school and battling depression, he became severely addicted to food. He gained about 50 pounds a year for the next decade before dying of a massive heart attack at the age of 28 while weighing just under 700 pounds. One of the traditional ways to make Okinawan snake wine is quite horrific. It involves putting the snake on ice until it passes out, after which it is gutted, bled, and sewn back up. When the snake is thawed out and reawakens, it quickly dies in an aggressive, striking manner. In 1977, the wife of Melvin Carr arrived home one morning and found her husband dead on the floor in their garage, along with 2 young women and a man dead in the trunk of his car. Police determined that Melvin had kidnapped them at gunpoint the night before, raped the 2 women, and gassed them all with a hose connected from his car's exhaust to the trunk. Melvin had apparently passed out from the toxic fumes upon opening the trunk to dispose of them and ended up meeting the same fate as his victims. In October of 2011, famed narrator David Attenborough found a skull in the garden of his London property. He immediately informed police, who later determined the skull belonged to the victim of a gruesome murder during the Victorian era. Julia Martha Thomas was killed by her housemaid in 1879 before being chopped up, boiled, and fed to local children. There's a room in the basement of Oregon State Hospital known today as the Room of Forgotten Souls. In 2004, hundreds of copper cans were discovered holding the remains of 3,600 mental patients who were cremated on site starting in 1917. Built in 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa was hailed as the greatest warship ever built, but infamously sank just 20 minutes into its maiden voyage, resulting in the deaths of at least 30 people. After it was salvaged in 1961, archaeologists found that the ship was horribly asymmetrical. Apparently, some of the builders had measured in Swedish feet, which was 12 inches, while others had measured in Amsterdam feet, which was 11 inches. The ship was knocked over by a mild gust of wind less than a mile into its voyage. Right after purchasing some hot coffee from McDonald's in 2004, 79-year-old Stella Liebeck accidentally spilled it into her lap, causing horrific third-degree burns. The woman quickly went into shock and was hospitalized for 8 days while undergoing skin grafts. Since the burns were so bad, her lady parts had melted and fused to her legs. Stella suffered permanent disfigurement after the incident and was partially disabled for 2 years. She then sued McDonald's for making the coffee way too hot and was only seeking $20,000 to cover her medical bills. But McDonald's refused to settle with Stella as the media completely demonized her, calling her the poster child of frivolous lawsuits. However, people quickly changed their tune when photos of the horrific burns finally released. With one of the jurors being so traumatized, he forced his wife to quit drinking hot coffee. Stella ended up winning $2.9 million in damages from the lawsuit, but her life was never the same again. Built during the reign of King Louis XVI in 1774, the Writing Boy was the first automatic android ever created. It was hand-built by Swiss watchmaker Pierre-Jacques Dreux and was designed to mimic the act of someone writing with incredible precision. A milestone in the history of robotics and engineering, the android is comprised of 6,000 moving parts that took more than 20 months to put together. The Sidarium of St. Veronica is an engraving made by French artist Claude Milan in 1649. It was created from a single spiraling unbroken line that starts at the tip of Jesus' nose. Discovered in 1972, this 8-inch long deuce was dropped by a Viking around the 8th century. Weighing in at just under 5 corics, it's the largest fossilized human turd ever found and has provided valuable insights into the dietary practices of ancient Vikings. In 2013, an ancient tree at an archaeological site in Romania was uprooted during a thunderstorm. Beneath the tree, the site's caretaker discovered an ancient bronze matrix that was used as a mold to craft jewelry for the Dacian civilization over 2,000 years ago. Just last year, Irish farmer Michael Boyle found this 50-pound chunk of bog butter on his property after digging up something that reeked of cheese. Ancient farmers would often bury these large chunks of animal fat in bogs for preservation. Despite it dating all the way back to the Bronze Age, Boyle says it still tastes like butter. If you were born prematurely, you can thank this man for your life. In the early 1900s, most physicians believed that premature babies were weaklings that were unfit to survive into adulthood and therefore not worth saving. But a sideshow entertainer named Martin Cooney decided to change that with his innovative incubators he called child hatcheries. He would display premature babies at amusement parks around the world through his exhibit called the Infantorium, where visitors could pay 25 cents to view a room full of glass boxes containing tiny babies. Cooney would use the earnings to work with nurses and doctors to do everything he could to keep the babies alive. His goal was to demonstrate to the public that premature babies could be saved with proper care. Through his efforts, Cooney saved over 7,000 lives, and by 1943, nearly every hospital in America had one of his incubators. His work completely changed the public's perception of premature babies and significantly contributed to the development of modern neonatal care. In 2010, University of Alabama Huntsman professor Dr. Amy Bishop was at a biology department meeting when she pulled out a handgun. A witness said that she got up suddenly, pulled out a gun, and started shooting each one of us. She started with the one closest to her and went down the row shooting her targets in the head. This wasn't random shooting around the room. This was execution style. Amy killed 3 of her colleagues and injured 3 others before her gun jammed, forcing her to surrender. During the investigation, it was found that Amy had shot and killed her brother in 1986, but was never charged since the death was ruled an accident. She was also questioned after a 1993 pipe bomb incident that was directed at her lab supervisor. And in another previous incident, she punched a woman in the face for taking the last available booster seat at an IHOP. Along with obvious mental health problems, Bishop was apparently motivated to murder her colleagues after the university denied her tenure. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison. There's an insane reason why the United States appeared on the Inside Actors studio in 2001. An audience member laughed so hard at one of his jokes that he developed a hernia and had to be rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. In 2012, a movie theater in Beirut was raided for showing K-porn, and 36 men were arrested and subjected to anal examinations to determine their sexual orientation. In Lebanon, people can be charged with intercourse contrary to nature, specifically intercourse that involves anal penetration, and can receive up to a year in prison. In the past few decades, some morbidly obese patients have been sent to zoos for MRI and CT scans because standard hospital machines can't accommodate their weight. Zoos have bigger machines designed for large animals, making them practical solutions in these extreme cases. Chicago's Iroquois Theater was advertised as absolutely fireproof when it first opened in 1903, but the building only lasted 37 days before being destroyed by a massive fire that killed 602 people, in the deadliest single-building disaster in the United States until 9/11. In 1966, James Meredith, the first black man to attend the University of Mississippi, planned a one-man, 220-mile march against fear to encourage black people to vote. But despite a police presence just 2 days into the march, James was shot in the neck, back, and head by a white supremacist. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and ended up surviving his wounds, while his attacker only received 2 years in prison. Later that same year, James completed the march, by which point over 10,000 people had joined him. James is now 91 and still lives in Mississippi. Depression-era gangster John Dillinger survived a shootout with the FBI, robbed 24 banks and 4 police stations, had plastic surgery to change his face and remove his fingerprints, escaped from prison using a wooden gun, and led the government on a year-long chase that cost them 4 times the amount he had ever stolen. After Dillinger was finally shot and killed by the FBI in 1934, bystanders rushed to the theater where he was killed to soak their handkerchiefs in his blood, while thousands stormed Chicago's morgue to have their photos taken with his corpse. Cult leader Amy Carlson, aka Mother God, convinced her followers that she was God, a 19-billion-year-old being, and that she could heal people from cancer with the power of love. Amy claimed she had reincarnated 534 times, with her past lives including Cleopatra, Jesus Christ, Harriet Tubman, and Marilyn Monroe. But Amy's health began to rapidly decline after she herself was reportedly diagnosed with cancer in 2020. She was eventually paralyzed from the neck down and begged her members to take her to the hospital, but they refused, and she ended up dying in April of 2021 at the age of 46. When police were alerted, they found her mummified corpse in a state of decay that suggested she'd been dead for several weeks. It was stuffed in a sleeping bag wrapped with Christmas lights, with the face covered in glitter and both eyes removed. Authorities stated it was a makeshift shrine and ended up charging 7 members of the group with desecration of a corpse. When Jimi Hendrix was 16, his mother died from a ruptured spleen at the young age of 33. But Jimmy's father didn't allow him or his brother to attend the funeral. Instead, he gave them shots of whiskey and told them that this was how men should deal with a loss. After several hours of drinking on board a ferry, Englishwoman Emma Blackwell fell to her death. She'd apparently been imitating Kate Winslet's pose from the Titanic movie and lost her footing before plummeting from the ship. Smile mask syndrome is a psychological condition characterized by prolonged unnatural smiling. It can lead to painful strain of the facial muscles and result in an inability to stop smiling even when agitated or upset. In 1993, Missouri man James Scott damaged a levee on the Mississippi River simply to delay his wife from coming home so that he could party. Instead, the river ended up flooding over 14,000 acres, and the 23-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison for intentionally causing a catastrophe. When Brian Spencer was called up to play in his first NHL game in 1970, he told his father Roy to watch the game that night since he knew he'd be interviewed between periods. But when he couldn't find a broadcast of the game, Roy drove to the nearest TV station in a fury and held the staff at gunpoint, ordering them to broadcast the Maple Leafs game immediately. The station complied, but as Roy was leaving the building, he was confronted by Canadian police and eventually killed after a standoff. The hockey player's life would end up spiraling out of control, as he would also be killed in a shootout after trying to rob his crack dealer. Wow, nice family, huh? During a hunting trip in 1913, race car driver Kamil Janatsky hid behind a bush and made animal noises to prank his friend before he was promptly shot. He was rushed to the hospital but died on his way there, fulfilling his own prediction that he would die in a Mercedes. In 1970, U.S. Air Force pilot Captain William Schaffner was ordered to follow a UFO over the North Sea when he ended up vanishing without a trace. A few weeks later, Schaffner's aircraft was found by divers and recovered from the sea. Strangely, its cockpit was sealed and the ejector seat was intact, but Schaffner's body was nowhere to be found. In 1981, American wildlife photographer Carl McCunn hired a bush pilot to drop him off in the Alaskan wilderness. He planned on camping by himself for 5 months to take photographs of wildlife, but would soon realize he'd forgotten to arrange for a return flight. As the weather grew colder and his supplies began to dwindle, Carl soon realized that he may never return home. At one point after he lost all hope, Carl was seen by an Alaskan state trooper plane but was ignored because he raised his fist in celebration, and a raised fist is known to be a signal that everything's okay. Referring to this incident, Carl wrote in his journal, "It's certainly my fault I'm here now. Man, I can't believe it. I really feel like a klutz. Now I know why nobody's shown up since." Sometime afterward, Carl ended up taking his own life by shotgun. Carl's campsite and corpse were found a few weeks later, along with his journal which detailed his harrowing final months. The beloved Bob Ross, who hosted The Joy of Painting in the 70s and 80s, was originally a master drill sergeant in the U.S. Air Force who screamed at men for a living. He was a strict, fearsome leader who became known as Bust 'em Up Bobby for his toughness towards subordinates. But Bob later said he didn't actually enjoy this aspect of his job, and promised that if he ever left the military, he would never shout again. This helped him develop the calm and gentle demeanor he became famous for on his painting show. After winning Academy Awards for Best Picture and Director for the movie Gandhi in 1982, Richard Attenborough openly claimed that Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial should have won instead. Spielberg ended up casting him as John Hammond in Jurassic Park to thank him. Hawaiian pizza was invented in Canada by a Greek immigrant who was inspired by Chinese food to put a South American ingredient on an Italian dish. Hawaiian pizza then went on to become the most popular pizza in Australia. In 2016, fitness instructor Missy Beavers was beaten to death while setting up for a class inside a Texas church. The case gained national attention after security footage showed a person wearing police tactical gear walking through the church and opening various doors. Police are certain this was Missy's killer, but he or she was never identified. Here are some lovely photos of Colombian drug lord Griselda Blanco with her son Michael. Blanco ordered a hit on her third husband Dario, who was killed by a gunman inside his car while Michael was sitting next to him. It's estimated that Griselda was responsible for at least 200 murders while transporting cocaine to the U.S. In 1986, California cop Craig Payer pulled over college student Kara Knott before beating her with his flashlight and strangling her. The officer was interviewed by the news during coverage of the murder investigation, and scratches that were inflicted by Knott could be seen on his face. Payer was soon found guilty of her murder. In 1968, 22-year-old Kenneth McDuff was sentenced to death for raping and murdering 3 young teens. He was later resentenced to life in prison and got off on parole in 1989. Within just 3 days of his release, McDuff started killing again and proceeded to rape and murder at least 6 more people before he was finally executed in 1998. In 2022, a badger burrowing into a cave in Spain accidentally dug up the largest collection of Roman coins ever found in the region. A local man was walking outside the cave and noticed nearly 100 coins randomly scattered on the ground next to a burrow. So he alerted archaeologists, who eventually found over 100 more ancient coins inside. Most of them date back to 300 AD and were likely hidden there by refugees over 1700 years ago. This apartment in Istanbul has renovations from 3 empires and 1 republic that ruled over the city at different times, all being built on top of each other. In 2016, Spanish man Juan Francisco was making some renovations in his home that resulted in a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Behind the first wall he removed, he found the facade of a Renaissance-era hospital that was built in the 16th century. Juan immediately alerted archaeologists, who told him it once belonged to St. George's Hospital, a long-forgotten masterpiece by famed Spanish architect Andrés de Vandel Vera. The structure is more than 30 feet tall and covers several floors of Juan's home. It's unclear as to why such an incredible work was hidden behind the wall of someone's home, but it had likely been that way for centuries. In February of last year, famed adult star Emily Willis was left permanently disabled after a health crisis at the facility that was treating her ketamine addiction. She'd reportedly been clean for several days when her health began to rapidly decline, and the rehab center allegedly failed to provide her with the proper care. Willis was barely eating or drinking while suffering from severe headaches, anxiety, night terrors, and a UTI. She eventually suffered a heart attack and wasn't taken to the hospital quickly enough, forcing paramedics to perform CPR for more than 30 minutes, resulting in oxygen deprivation and irreversible brain damage. Willis entered a vegetative state for 2 months and now suffers from locked-in syndrome, a condition where the patient is conscious but can't move any muscles except those that control eye movements. Her family is now suing the rehab center, alleging medical negligence, inadequate supervision, and delayed emergency intervention, which they claim led to her awful permanent condition. In the year 2000, 11-year-old Candace Newmaker died during an extreme therapy session in Colorado. The adopted girl was undergoing attachment therapy when 4 unlicensed therapists decided to perform the controversial treatment known as rebirthing. She was wrapped in a flannel sheet and covered with pillows to represent a womb and was told to fight her way out of it, with the apparent expectation that this would help her attach to her adoptive mother. All 4 therapists used their body weight to push down on Candace and resist her attempts to free herself. Candace screamed several times that she couldn't breathe and was gonna die, and even started to vomit, but was simply called a quitter by one of the therapists. 40 minutes into the session, Candace was asked if she was ready to be reborn, to which she faintly responded no, which would be her last word before she died of asphyxiation. All 4 fake therapists were prosecuted, 2 of whom were sentenced to 16 years in prison after the disturbing footage was shown in court. Known for her roles in Harriet the Spy, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 17 Again, and Gossip Girl, actress Michelle Trachtenberg has tragically passed away at the age of 39. She was found unconscious and unresponsive in her New York City apartment by her mother on the morning of February 26th. Trachtenberg had posted a series of troubling photos on Instagram in recent months, appearing rather gaunt and frail, prompting fans to comment on her weight loss, suspecting she'd been on drugs. But in reality, the actress had recently undergone a liver transplant and was likely experiencing complications. She's believed to have died of natural causes, as no foul play is suspected at this time. According to his memoir, when Vice President J.D. Vance was 12 years old, his drug-addicted mother was once driving erratically and threatened to crash her car to kill them both. J.D. had no choice but to jump out of the speeding vehicle and run to a nearby house for help. He now refers to this event as a turning point in his life, since it prompted him to move in with his non-abusive grandmother and work towards a more stable life. In the year 2000, Mexican woman Ines Ramirez performed an hour-long C-section on herself after suffering 12 hours of constant pain. Using a large kitchen knife, she made a 7-inch vertical incision and pulled the baby boy out of her own uterus. Despite no prior medical training, both Ramirez and her baby miraculously survived. In 1996, 16-year-old Travis Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder of Sally McKay. While seeking closure, Sally's daughter Martha visited Travis several times in prison and eventually forgave him for killing her mother. When he was released on parole 23 years later, Martha allowed Travis to move in with her and gave him a job as groundskeeper of her estate. But when she realized the man was frequently stealing from her, Martha fired Travis and kicked him out. Soon afterwards, Travis broke into Martha's home and stabbed her to death before drowning in a nearby lake while running from police. A woman from Turkey recently underwent surgery to have 35 olive pits, 28 date seeds, and 5 stones removed from her digestive tract. She was experiencing severe abdominal pain, leading to the discovery that she'd been swallowing various pits and seeds for decades. After narrowly avoiding death due to the complications, she's now vocal about urging people to never swallow large seeds. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, General Eisenhower was under so much stress that he'd been smoking 6 packs of cigarettes, drinking 24 cups of coffee, and averaging just 2 hours of sleep every day. In the 1950s, 3 campers were found dead at their campsite in Oregon without any sign of struggle. Investigators were stumped until they soon found a dead newt in the hunter's coffee pot. They likely died after drinking the coffee, since newts can produce a toxin that's 10,000 times more potent than cyanide. Ancient Greek lawmaker Charondas issued a law stating that anyone who brought weapons into the Athenian assembly would be executed. One day after hunting in the countryside, he entered the assembly without knowing that his hunting knife was still attached to his belt. He then promptly took his own life to uphold his own law. In 2013, Rain Periwinkle was shopping for clothes at the dollar store with her 3 daughters when an older man named Donald Smith approached them and offered to buy them all clothes at Walmart. Desperate for the favor, the family got into his van and shopped with him for the next 2 hours. At some point, Smith offered to buy them burgers at the in-store McDonald's, and Rain's 8-year-old daughter Cherish went with him. But after they didn't return for more than 30 minutes, Rain called police, who were immediately concerned. It turned out that Smith was known to police as a local sex offender with a long criminal history of assaults, and he'd just been released from prison 3 weeks prior. The next morning, Cherish's lifeless body was found in a nearby creek. It's believed that Smith bound her in the back of his van before assaulting and strangling her to death. During Smith's trial, the jurors were in tears after being shown the crime scene photos, and even the medical examiner had to request a break. The 56-year-old Florida man was eventually sentenced to death for the heinous murder. The great Harry Houdini once escaped a prison cell while fully nude to show that he wasn't hiding anything to help his escape. But the guards who checked him apparently failed to fully inspect him, since Houdini was hiding the key up his chocolate starfish. Pubic wigs known as merkins were worn by prostitutes as early as the 15th century. The purpose for this accessory was that pubic hair was once considered popular and attractive, but sex workers often shaved their lower parts to avoid pubic lice, and these merkins also helped them cover up signs of STDs from their clients. Early colonizers of the United States commonly used corn cobs as toilet paper, since they were soft, plentiful, and the grooves were quite efficient at getting the job done. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus was only 14 when he assumed power and would often prostitute himself in taverns and brothels. He would frequently stand around naked while swinging his ding-a-ling and would offer vast sums of money to any doctor who could give him a vagina. He was killed at age 19, and his only positive legacy was the invention of the whoopee cushion, which he would use on unsuspecting dinner guests. A teenager from Brazil recently died in one of the strangest ways you'll ever hear of. He crushed up a dead butterfly and mixed the remains with water before injecting the liquid into his leg with a syringe. After continuously vomiting and limping several days later, he was taken to the hospital where he stayed for more than a week before eventually dying from septic shock. The boy never gave a reason for injecting the insect into his bloodstream. Up until 2017, if you caught your spouse in bed with someone else in Uruguay, it was within your legal right to murder either one of them. In 1997, struggling father of 3 Billy Bob Harrell Jr. became a millionaire overnight after winning the $31 million jackpot in the Texas lottery. But as friends, family, and strangers continuously pressured him to share his fortune, Harrell's spending went out of control, eventually resulting in he and his wife's divorce. Just 2 years after winning the lottery, Harrell ended up taking his own life just a few days after telling his friend, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me." This 1968 photo shows South Vietnamese women and children just moments before they were killed in the My Lai massacre. Witnesses later stated that American troops tried tearing the blouse off the woman in back as her mother attempted to protect her. Grape had become such a big issue across Africa that a South African medical technician invented Grape-X in 2005. It's a device with sharp teeth that gets inserted into a woman's private area. Any man who attempts to grape her will impale himself on the teeth and must go to the hospital to have the device removed. In Guatemala 2017, hundreds of teenage girls tried to protest and escape from an orphanage due to continuous grape and abuse. As punishment, 51 of them were locked in a small classroom without any food, water, or toilets. The next day, a fire was started inside the room, reportedly by several girls as an act of protest. But the staff still refused to open the door and simply watched them all burn from the outside. 41 girls ended up perishing in this awful tragedy. When Brian Spencer was called up to play in his first NHL game in 1970, he told his father Roy to watch the game that night since he knew he'd be interviewed between periods. But when he couldn't find a broadcast of the game, Roy drove to the nearest TV station in a fury and held the staff at gunpoint, ordering them to broadcast the Maple Leafs game immediately. The station complied, but as Roy was leaving the building, he was confronted by Canadian police and eventually killed after a standoff. The hockey player's life would end up spiraling out of control, as he would also be killed in a shootout after trying to rob his crack dealer. Wow, nice family, huh? During a hunting trip in 1913, race car driver Kamil Janatsky hid behind a bush and made animal noises to prank his friend before he was promptly shot. He was rushed to the hospital but died on his way there, fulfilling his own prediction that he would die in a Mercedes. In 1970, U.S. Air Force pilot Captain William Schaffner was ordered to follow a UFO over the North Sea when he ended up vanishing without a trace. A few weeks later, Schaffner's aircraft was found by divers and recovered from the sea. Strangely, its cockpit was sealed and the ejector seat was intact, but Schaffner's body was nowhere to be found. Children's entertainer and YouTuber Stephen John, aka Blippi, hasn't always been so family-friendly. He began his career as a gross-out video creator under the name Steezy Grossman, and would post shocking videos of himself performing grotesque acts across illicit websites. Most infamously, he performed the Harlem Shake in 2013 while standing unclothed on a toilet and defecated all over his unclothed friend. Despite Steven's regret and extensive efforts to have the video removed from the internet, it can still be found rather easily. Don't try to find it. Please don't. Oh my god, why did I watch it? What the fuck, Blippi? In 2013, unemployed 30-year-old Princeton graduate Thomas Gilbert Jr. shot and killed his hedge fund manager father just hours after being told his $1,000 weekly allowance would be cut down to just $300. He was sentenced to at least 30 years in prison. A Japanese pilot who bombed a town in Oregon during World War II returned 20 years later to present his family's 400-year-old sword as a symbol of regret. His daughter said that if he'd received a negative reaction, he would have used the sword to perform seppuku on himself instead. Taylor Momsen, who's known for playing Cindy Lou Who in The Grinch, did something quite disturbing after getting her dog neutered. According to her bandmate, she kept the nuts and brought them to the recording studio before setting them on fire. Many countries across the globe have reportedly used pharmacological torture as a cruel method of interrogation. The prisoner is first injected with addictive drugs to induce dependence. After several days, the drugs are taken away and the interrogation begins once the person goes into withdrawal. If the person complies with the demands, then the drugs are reintroduced. Just last week, 43-year-old Anne-Marie Holchalter became the 14th victim of the Columbine School Massacre. She was paralyzed by the shooters back in 1999 and has sadly passed due to complications related to her condition. The Chijon family was a gang of 8 South Korean former convicts who literally ate the rich. Their hatred for rich people was apparently so extreme that they would kidnap, grape, cannibalize, and murder random people whom they thought were wealthy. The members were eventually caught and sentenced to death, but showed no remorse, with their leader saying his only regret was not having killed more rich people. In 1997, the Cat in the Hat Thanksgiving Day Parade float careened out of control due to high winds, knocking a lamppost into the head of Kathleen Karana, putting her in a month-long coma. She sued Macy's in the city for $395 million and ended up settling for an undisclosed amount in 2001. Kathleen eventually purchased a nice New York City apartment with the settlement money, but just 5 years later, Yankees pitcher Corey Lidle crashed his plane into her building and the engine ended up in her bedroom. Luckily, the crash happened just minutes before Kathleen was due to arrive home, but Lidle and his flight instructor were both killed while 21 others in the building were injured. Adding to the weirdness of this story, the flight instructor's friend was also supposed to be on this flight but got stuck in traffic and told them to leave without him. So he managed to escape death until just 1 month later when he was killed in a separate plane crash. The Babushka Lady was the name given to an unidentified person who was present at JFK's assassination in 1963. He or she was seen filming before and after the president was shot in the head but later disappeared into the crowd. That recording may have been crucial in revealing the truth about JFK's killing, but the person has never come forward with the footage. Austrian Mayor Hans Steininger died in 1567 after breaking his neck by tripping on his own ridiculously long beard while running from a house fire. In 2010, a Russian man died after being voluntarily buried alive by his friends. He was simply trying to overcome his irrational fear of dying when the ground suddenly caved in and crushed him. In 2008, a British woman died in one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Her husband admitted he would hook homemade clamps to the woman's nipples and administer electric shocks to turn her on. Apparently, it went a little too far this one time, and the woman was electrocuted to death. The husband was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to at least 20 years in prison. In 2010, Dr. Jacqueline Koterick tried breaking into her ex-boyfriend's home by climbing down his chimney. 3 days later, a house sitter discovered her decomposing body inside after she apparently died from mechanical asphyxia. In 2008, a woman from China cut off her husband's beaver cleaver with scissors while he was sleeping, after he reportedly brought another woman home and requested a threesome. While the man was recovering from the surgery that reattached it, his wife cut it off again and threw it out the window. In 1989, Montana woman Patricia Meehan was driving on the wrong side of the highway and eventually crashed into another car. She emerged from her vehicle with a confused look on her face before climbing over a fence and staring back at the wreckage. Patricia stood there for a few moments before wandering into the open field behind her and disappearing into the night. Despite hundreds of reported sightings of her in the months that followed, she hasn't been located to this day. Some investigators suspect Patricia suffered from amnesia as a result of head trauma, but the case remains unsolved. While on vacation in Bulgaria in 2014, 28-year-old German man Lars Matank got into a bar fight that left him with a ruptured eardrum. He was unable to fly home with his friends due to the injuries, but told them he was totally fine and only planned on staying for a couple extra nights. However, the next day, Lars began acting paranoid. He called his mom and whispered that she should cancel his credit cards because someone was trying to kill him. Security cams in the hotel showed him pacing up and down the halls and peeking out the windows for several hours. After arriving at the airport the next day, Lars saw the airport doctor who gave him the okay to fly. But that's when Lars began shaking and suddenly yelled, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." He then got up and sprinted from the office, leaving behind all of his luggage, including his phone, wallet, and ID. Once outside, he was seen jogging from the airport, hopping a fence, and sprinting in the direction of a nearby forest. Lars would never be seen again. In 1995, 13-year-old Thad Phillips was kidnapped while he was asleep in his Wisconsin bedroom. He'd been abducted by 17-year-old Joseph Clark, a local boy who was obsessed with the sound of bones breaking. Over 48 grueling hours, Clark broke both of the boy's hips, legs, shins, and ankles with his bare hands. Phillips eventually managed to escape from the nightmare and reported Clark to police. Sometime later, Phillips was sitting at home awaiting the trial when one of Clark's friends rang the doorbell and shot Phillips twice in the back, apparently to prevent him from testifying. Clark was sentenced to life in prison, and Phillips was eventually able to walk again. In 2008, Indigenous Canadian man Brian Sinclair went to the hospital because of a blocked catheter. After many hours passed in the waiting area, other patients began to urge medical staff to attend to Sinclair, who was clearly in pain, but they responded that they were helping other patients and would eventually get to him. After 34 hours had passed, Sinclair ended up dying in the waiting room and had already developed rigor mortis by the time medical staff attended to him. Turns out he had a very treatable bladder infection and could have easily been saved. In 2014, the incredibly preserved photograph of a young woman was found in the wreckage of the SS Central America, which sunk during a hurricane in 1857. The woman's identity is unknown, but the photo has been dubbed the Mona Lisa of the Deep. This is the earliest known depiction of Jesus Christ, scratched into a wall around 200 AD by someone who gave him a donkey's head to mock their friend for believing in Jesus. This is the only surviving handwriting of an ancient Roman emperor. It was written by Theodosius II around 430 AD and reads in Latin, "We desire that you be well." This is the only ancient Roman slave tag discovered that's still attached to its collar. Its inscription reads, "I have fled, seize me and return me to Xeninus for 1 gold coin." Here's a pictograph found at Barrier Canyon in the Utah desert depicting a humanoid with bug eyes and antennae. It's at least 2,500 years old. This is the only surviving example of a Ghiornia from the 15th century. This garb was a staple of Italian fashion in the 1400s, with this one belonging to Diego Cavaniglia, who died in 1481. Before it was found near his tomb in 2004, we only knew of gonorrheas through paintings and written records. A German company that sells cleaning equipment used its power washers to create this incredible image of Godzilla on a Japanese dam. BBC's billboard for their Dracula series may have confused drivers during the day, but the true genius behind it became clear by the night. To promote a sale, clothing company Superette created benches with etched lettering to temporarily brand people with their ad. Ancient Greek prostitutes would often advertise via their shoes, which imprinted the words "Follow me" in the sand. This brilliant 1960s Coca-Cola ad was made by spreading grains for pigeons in St. Mark's Square in Venice. The bug repellent company Orphea used adhesive to turn their billboard into a massive mosquito trap, eventually revealing the spray. The 3M company, which produces bulletproof glass, put $3 million inside a glass box at a bus station with the slogan, "If you can break it, you keep the money." After 24 hours, not a single person managed to break. Iconic actor Jack Nicholson has faced his fair share of legal controversies over the years. In 1996, he reportedly assaulted an unnamed Hollywood socialite at a party and ruptured her breast implants. Then that same year, he allegedly promised a prostitute named Catherine Sheehan $1,000 for sex and then assaulted her when she asked for the money. Sheehan claimed that Nicholson promptly grabbed her by the hair, thumped her head on the floor, and then threw her out of his house. She received a $40,000 settlement, but later argued that this was insufficient to cover her injuries, including brain damage, which she said was actually killing her. In 1849, Henry Box Brown escaped from slavery by shipping himself in a small wooden crate from Virginia to Philadelphia. Despite the instructions on the box of "handle with care and this side up," carriers placed the box upside down or handled it roughly several times. 350 miles and 27 brutal hours later, Brown stepped out of the box a free man and went on to become a magician. When later asked why he went to such an extreme to escape slavery, Brown was quoted saying, "If you've ever been deprived of liberty as I was, you cannot realize the power of that hope of freedom." Just last year, a 23-year-old man died from a catastrophic spinal injury while playing at a Topgolf with some friends. In what was described as a prank gone wrong, his drunken friends had pushed him off the platform, causing him to miss the safety netting and fall 12 feet directly onto his head. In 1990, a flight heading from Medellin, Colombia to New York City crashed onto a hillside after running out of fuel, killing nearly half of the passengers on board. While being treated for serious injuries, 2 of the male passengers were arrested when ER doctors found baggies of cocaine that they'd swallowed and attempted to smuggle. Both men were sentenced to 6 years to life in prison. The British Pet Massacre was a week-long event in 1939, during which an estimated 400,000 cats and dogs, 1/4 of England's pet population, were killed out of fear of them eventually being gassed or left behind during an evacuation. Almost immediately afterwards, the event was recognized as completely unnecessary, stemming from social panic from the impending war and people seeking a way to feel like they were contributing to the war effort. None of the fears that led to the massacre actually ended up materializing. Last year, Wisconsin elementary school teacher Madison Bergman faced 10 felony charges for having an inappropriate relationship with her 5th grade student. Investigators were shown disturbing screenshots of their text conversations, in which Bergman would talk about how much she enjoyed making out with the young student. The two also exchanged over 100 letters, love notes, and artwork over several months. She was reportedly still graping him up to 3 months before she was supposed to get married to her fiancé. Bergman has pleaded not guilty to all 10 counts. Ohio sex worker Linda Lassess prompted a multi-state public health alert after police discovered she'd slept with more than 200 clients while knowing she was HIV positive. Officers worked hard to contact her clients and suggest getting tested so they could seek the proper treatment. Randy Woodfield was drafted by the NFL to play for the Green Bay Packers in 1974, but was soon cut from the team due to a series of indecent exposure arrests. He would go on to become the I-5 killer and is believed to have been responsible for over 40 murders throughout the early 1980s. Chris Pratt dropped out of community college halfway through his first semester and ended up homeless in Maui. He was a daytime stripper and waited tables at the Bubba Gump Shrimp Factory, where he was eventually discovered by the daughter of Tommy Chong while serving her table. In 1950, an inventor was trying to make a waterproof sock to prevent trench foot in soldiers. Upon crafting a latex-coated sock and filling it with water to test for leaks, he found a rip and threw it on his table in frustration. Instantly pleased with the pop and splash, he decided to market water balloons to children. Jaywalking was invented by car companies in the early 1900s to shift the blame for accidents from motorists to pedestrians. The stethoscope was invented by Dr. René Laennec in 1816 because he wasn't comfortable placing his ear directly onto a woman's chest to listen to her heartbeat. In 1980, Star Wars was releasing a Christmas music album, but producers wanted a better singer for the track R2-D2 We Wish You a Merry Christmas. So they asked the 17-year-old kid who swept the floors at the studio, and he totally nailed it. His name was Jon Bon Jovi, and this marked the beginning of his professional singing career. In 1986, Andres Martinez lost control of his tanker truck and crashed into a mountain pass in Spain. He and his wife died on impact, but their 10-year-old son Juan Pedro was nowhere to be seen. No sign or remains of him have ever been found to this day, as Interpol has called it the strangest missing person case in Europe. The founder of North Face, Douglas Tompkins, died from hypothermia after a kayaking accident in 2015. He'd been traveling with longtime friend and Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard in the mountains of Patagonia. In 1964, actor Peter Sellers inhaled some poppers before getting in bed with his wife. He was apparently trying to achieve the ultimate gasm, but instead suffered 8 heart attacks over a 3-hour span. In 1999, tobacco manufacturer Philip Morris tried convincing the government of the Czech Republic that smoking was highly beneficial to the country. They argued that more people would die earlier as a result of smoking, thus helping the government save millions on pensions, hospitals, and housing for the elderly. In 2006, 26-year-old Illinois teacher and wrestler Samson Shelton admitted to police that he raped a 17-year-old student before choking her and tossing her body into a wooded area. He then put a belt around her neck to make it look like she was strangled and left her for dead, after which Shelton went line dancing with friends. Suffering from brain damage and a broken neck, the teenager survived but had to relearn how to swallow, walk, and talk. But despite his heinous crimes, Shelton was released on parole just last year after serving out 17 of his 20-year prison sentence. In 2008, a train traveling 70 miles an hour struck and killed an 18-year-old man who was running across the tracks and apparently didn't realize how fast the train was moving. The impact flung the man's body over 100 feet, and his flying body parts knocked a 58-year-old woman to the ground, breaking her wrist, shoulder, and leg. The woman later sued the man's family on the basis that, if you did something as stupid as this guy did, you have to be responsible for what comes from it. These photos from 1999 show Columbine student Dustin Gorton after being told the shooters were his good friends Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Dustin was reportedly a very nice kid and couldn't fathom his friends killing 12 innocent students. In 2020, Alita Aliquin took an online DNA test which showed a 22% match with a man she didn't know. She would soon discover that the man was her still-alive uncle, who was kidnapped in 1951 at the age of 6 and had been missing for nearly 70 years. After he was abducted from a park in Oakland, he was flown to the East Coast and raised by a couple as their own. While filming The Wizard of Oz, MGM executives referred to 16-year-old Judy Garland as an ugly duckling and little hunchback. They made her wear caps on her teeth and rubber discs in her nose, and put her on a strict diet of chicken soup, coffee, and 80 cigarettes per day. All of this likely contributed to her struggles with addiction later on in her life. Here's a map of all the sunken Imperial Japanese Navy ships of World War II. Speaking of ugly ducklings, The Swan was a 2004 reality show where participants underwent extreme makeovers including plastic surgery to transform from ugly ducklings into swans for a final beauty contest. Despite putting up big numbers, the show was canceled after just 2 seasons due to public backlash. Talented artist Norman Lee worked for Marvel Comics for nearly 20 years until he suddenly disappeared in 2015. He was snorkeling in the Cayman Islands with his wife but never returned ashore and his body was never found. In 1996, 16-year-old Jonathan Capewell died as a result of his obsession to smell good. The teenager covered his entire body in cologne at least twice per day until he eventually died from a heart attack. At the time of his death, Capewell had 10 times the lethal dosage of butane in his blood after the gas built up in his body for several months. In 1974, a group of 6 men entered the Hi-Fi audio store in Utah and held everyone inside hostage. The hostages were then subjected to brutal torture, including being forced to drink drain cleaner, which left them with horrible burns in their throats and mouths. One of the victims had a ballpoint pen inserted into his ear that was stomped on until it punctured his eardrum and came out his throat. All 5 hostages were later shot in the head, 3 of whom died. 2 of the perpetrators were sentenced to death, while the 3 other men involved were never caught. Martha Stewart once dated Anthony Hopkins, but broke it off with him after watching The Silence of the Lambs. She says she couldn't separate Hopkins from his cannibalistic character, Hannibal Lecter. RFK's assassin, Sirhan Sirhan, is still alive today and has been denied parole 17 times. According to historians, we would have a lot more Egyptian mummies intact today if so many of them weren't eaten during the Victorian era. People used to believe that the ground-up corpses of ancient Egyptians could cure different ailments. Harvey Weinstein reportedly had gangrene around his private area, giving his shaft a Frankenstein look that appeared as if it was chopped off and sewn back on. His ghoulies were also removed during treatment of his gangrene, leading to several of his victims suspecting that he was intersex. When Roman Emperor Commodus was in power, he had his men gather all the dwarves and disabled people they could find around the city. They were brought to the Colosseum, where each of them was given a meat cleaver and forced to fight to the death. 18-year-old student John Savage was spared during the Columbine Massacre in 1999. He was hiding underneath a table in the library as Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were going around shooting random students. At one point, Harris aimed his gun at Savage and told him to identify himself. A friend of Klebold's, John, showed his face and asked Klebold what he was doing. The shooter responded, "Oh, just killing people." Savage then asked if they were gonna kill him, to which Klebold responded no and told John to run out of the building, which he did. Cello player Mike Edwards was an original founding member of the band Electric Light Orchestra. Tragically, he died in 2010 when a massive hay bale rolled down a hillside and collided with his van. In 2008, a man from California injected cocaine into his arm and apparently thought he accidentally injected some air into his vein. So he quickly ran into a Denny's restaurant and attempted to amputate his own arm using a butter knife. Police eventually subdued the man with a taser and rushed him to the hospital as Denny's closed for the night. In 2016, Texas father Daniel Shaver was held up by police after he was seen pointing a pellet gun out of his hotel window. Several officers had rifles pointed at Schaefer in the hallway as he attempted to comply with them, but their commands were confusing and contradictory, especially since Shaver was drunk. For example, they told Shaver not to put his hands down for any reason before telling him to start crawling towards them. As Shaver was crawling and begging for his life, he reached back to pull his pants up and was killed instantly by Officer Philip Brailsford, who later claimed he thought Shaver was reaching for a weapon. Brailsford was charged with second-degree murder and found not guilty, since the full unedited footage wasn't released until hours after his acquittal. Brailsford was rehired by the department and reimbursed for all the medical expenses he paid, while seeking treatment for the PTSD he claimed he acquired from the shooting. Because of this, Brailsford was medically retired and now collects a $2,500 pension every month. In 2017, British hairdresser Daryl Rowe was convicted of deliberately infecting 5 men with HIV. He would meet his victims through dating apps before sleeping with them, after which he would send them taunting messages telling them he lied about being HIV negative. Rowe ended up being sentenced to life imprisonment for his evil actions. In 1966, an 18-year-old man entered a beauty school in Arizona before shooting 7 people inside, killing 5 of them, including a toddler. When questioned about his motive, he said he simply did it to get his name out there. Doctor and philanthropist Patch Adams only agreed to the 1999 film about his life because the producers promised to help build his hospital. But none of the profits from the film were ever given to his foundation, and Adams himself said he hated the movie and everything it stood for. In 1955, a pregnant woman was scheduled for a C-section in Morocco, but she fled the hospital after watching another woman die during the procedure. She was in pain for a few days afterwards, but when the pain suddenly disappeared, she simply went on with her life. 46 years later, she was diagnosed with a tumor that turned out to be the calcified baby still inside of her. In 1983, Carla Faye Tucker murdered a couple with a pickaxe while attempting to rob them, striking each of them more than 20 times and later saying she felt a sexual thrill with each blow. Tucker was sentenced to death for her crimes, but after converting to Christianity during her time in prison, there was a worldwide campaign to spare her life, even involving Pope John Paul II and the brother of one of her victims. However, Texas Governor George Bush ultimately blocked the appeal, saying, "The gender of the murderer did not make a difference to the victims," and Tucker was executed by lethal injection in 1998. South Carolina woman Mary Wilson was using her blow dryer when she suddenly passed out with her hand on top of it. The dryer continued blowing hot air directly onto her skin for at least 20 minutes, causing third-degree burns all the way to the bone. Wilson was rushed to the hospital, where doctors found nerve damage so severe they had to amputate her entire hand. The yellow outline is the size of SeaWorld's parking lot. The green dot is where orcas will spend their entire lives. When he was in high school, comedian Kevin James was a beast at wrestling. He was the top-ranked wrestler at his school, even ahead of his friend and future wrestling superstar Mick Foley, who was ranked second. The two would often face each other in practice as wrestling partners, and Kevin won most of the time. Foley says that when they were teenagers, James was the toughest kid in school, and one of the only kids he knew who could bench press 300 pounds. But Kevin's wrestling dream came to an end when he suffered a severe back injury, allowing Foley to take his spot as the top-ranked wrestler and launch his career of wrestling stardom. James then pushed for a football career until another injury took him out, so he instead settled for a life as a millionaire comedian. The first karaoke machine was built by Japanese nightclub musician Daisuke Inoue in 1971, but he didn't patent his invention because he wanted to teach the world to sing. He earned nothing from the billion-dollar industry he created and says he has no regrets to this day. A Confederate soldier named John Pemberton was stabbed in the chest during the American Civil War. His efforts to control his resulting chronic pain led to a bad addiction to morphine. Attempting to break this habit, Pemberton started mixing various painkillers with carbonated water and soon developed what would become the most well-known product in the world, Coca-Cola. The original recipe contained cocaine and alcohol and did nothing to curb Pemberton's morphine addiction. Dolly Parton was born dirt poor in a one-bedroom cabin in the mountains of Tennessee. The home had no electricity or running water, so Dolly and her 11 siblings struggled to stay clean. Their father was a sharecropper who couldn't read and struggled to make ends meet for his many children. As the family grew, the older kids took on more responsibilities, and Dolly, being the fourth of 12 children, had to look after her younger siblings and would often entertain them with her guitar playing and singing before turning her talents into a career. Much of her music is inspired by her tough upbringing, and today she donates millions to help those in need. It's widely believed that Shrek was modeled after Maurice Tillett, aka the world's ugliest man. He was a celebrated pro wrestler in the 1940s who suffered from acromegaly, a condition that results in bone overgrowth and thickening. DreamWorks has declined to comment on whether or not this is true, despite the uncanny resemblance. Here's the Paramount Pictures logo on the day it was originally painted in 1965. DJ scratching was invented in 1975 when Grand Wizard Theodore would play his records too loudly, prompting his mother to constantly enter his room and scold him. This caused Theodore to hold the record still, accidentally moving it back and forth and liking the sound it made. RFK Jr.'s gravelly speaking voice is caused by a rare neurological condition he developed in his early 40s called spasmodic dysphonia, which causes the muscles that open and close the vocal cords to spasm involuntarily. Here's what he used to sound like before this condition versus after.
And if somebody dumps something into the river that's poison, and it goes into a drinking water intake, and children drink that drinking water, that is child abuse.
I think those vaccines we need to have, again, true double-blind placebo-controlled trials on that. There's 25% of Americans.
While the true cause is unknown, people who do a lot of public speaking are far more likely to develop this condition. RFK required a titanium bridge in his vocal folds to be able to speak at all, and receives Botox shots in his vocal cords every 4 months. He says it's painful to hear himself speak and feels sorry for those who have to listen to him. In 1987, North Korean spy Kim Hyun-hui blew up Korean Air Flight 858, killing all 115 passengers on board. After failing to take a cyanide pill afterwards, she told interrogators it was a direct order from Kim Jong-il that she had no way of backing out of without being killed. The woman was originally sentenced to death, but later pardoned by the South Korean president, who said she was merely a brainwashed victim of the real culprit, the North Korean government. Hyun-hui ended up marrying one of her interrogators, and they live happily ever after with their 2 children. While recording the audio version of his book Charlotte's Web, it took author E.B. White 17 takes to read the death scene of Charlotte. He's said to have walked outside for a breather, come back in, and started crying again every time he got to that moment. In 1184, the King of Germany was conducting a meeting with his noblemen on the 2nd floor of a church when the floor suddenly collapsed. The king, whose seat was on a separate section that didn't collapse, watched in horror as 60 of his noblemen drowned in the cesspit located below that hadn't been emptied out in years. In 1998, Lenny Dieriksen was eating breakfast with his 19-year-old son when a stranger suddenly showed up at their Oklahoma farm. Lenny went out and spoke with the man for several minutes, before coming back inside and telling his son that the man wanted to look at one of his stud horses. But after leaving his home in the man's truck, Lenny never returned. He was apparently seen having lunch with the stranger at a local coffee shop a few hours later, but the trail went cold as the stud horse that Lenny mentioned was never visited that day. 6 months later, someone called 911 claiming he saw Lenny at a local bar, but he was gone before police could get there. The case remains unsolved to this day. In New Brunswick, Canada in 2013, 2 little boys were strangled to death by a 100-pound python while at a sleepover at their friend's house. The snake apparently snuck into the apartment through a vent connected to a pet shop below the boys' room. Experts claimed it's highly unlikely for a python to just go on a human killing spree, but the boys had gone to a petting zoo earlier in the day, so they may have smelled like food to the snake. The snake was euthanized, and the snake's owner was eventually found not guilty of negligent homicide.